While there's a good number of ways that somebody can describe Nintendo's follow-up to the NES, the Super Nintendo was certainly super, way cool, awesome, and groovy, but it isn't just the console that fits these descriptors. Super Mario World pushed the Mario series to new extremes, not just in gameplay, but even in the language it used. In the Western localization of the game, the names of levels in the Special World made use of typical 90s American surfer lingo, utilizing descriptive words like gnarly, tubular, way cool, awesome, groovy, mondo, outrageous, and funky. It's moments when you acknowledge inherently localized language like this that begs the question, what were the names of these levels in the original Japanese version? Well, bizarrely, a bunch of these levels actually all share the same name. The first two are both called Fun Course, while the third and fourth are called Even the Mario Staff is Shocked Course, Fourth Wall Be Damned. Levels 5 and 6 are both Specialists Course, while the 7th and 8th courses are both called Championship Course. None of the shared names are even differentiated through numbers like Fun Course 1 or Fun Course 2. Every now and then, Nintendo will grant interviews to a lucky few journalists. And every now and then, these interviews won't just be fluff to promote a new game. In 2020, journalist Stephen Totillo got to interview some key developers of Luigi's Mansion 3, but also ended up getting some insight into A Link to the Past's production as well. At E3 2019, it was implied that Luigi's Mansion 3's hotel setting would allow for multiple floor puzzles, since the layout of the hotel would be easy to visualize. However, this idea was scaled down to multi-room puzzles due to the difficulty of designing challenges across several floors. One developer who was a part of the Totillo interview was Luigi's Mansion 3 producer Kensuke Tanabe, who also happened to be the scenario writer on A Link to the Past. And when the topic of the multi-floor puzzles being cut was brought up in the interview, Tanabe compared it to content being cut from A Link to the Past. Tanabe stated, "When that happens, I try not to cling to that initial idea too much. For example, this is when I was working on The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. At first, we were thinking about structuring the game with numerous parallel worlds. However, in order to establish the gameplay in the end, we decided that it would be much better to narrow it down to two worlds, light and dark. I think game development involves much work where you never know unless you actually test it out. So it seems like A Link to the Past was at one time a much more complicated game." These early stages of a game's development are definitely one of the more interesting things to reflect on after a game's release, especially when the final product ends up being very different. Donkey Kong Country has an interesting history in this regard, with its origins leading back to a pitch made by Rare to Nintendo during the mid-90s titled Donkey Kong vs. Super Wario. The game's original premise was that Mario had invented a time machine, but Wario managed to sneak into his laboratory and used it to acquire a futuristic beam gun that he then used to turn Mario into stone. Wario then proclaims that he'll use his new weapon to rule all of, quote, Nintendo Land, but, unbeknownst to him, a parrot in the corner of the room witnessed everything that took place. The parrot goes off to warn Donkey Kong, who immediately decides to stop Wario then and there. In the end, Nintendo rejected this pitch, but they did ask Rare to create an entirely new collection of enemies for the game, rather than falling back onto Wario. The result of which was the creation of the Kremlings, and the development of a new pitch title, Donkey Kong and the Golden Bananas. This second pitch had a different plot, this time revolving around a golden banana stolen whilst under Donkey Kong's protection, after he fell asleep during guard duty. The golden banana was a relic sacred to his homeland, now stolen by Corporal Crizzle, an early prototype Kremling prior to the creation of King K. Rool. Grandpa Kong, an early prototype version of Cranky Kong, wakes Donkey Kong from his sleep and tells him to rescue the golden banana, as now the entire island was at stake. But before setting off on his adventure, Donkey Kong enlists the help of Junior to retrieve it, an early prototype version of Diddy Kong. This idea would ultimately evolve into Donkey Kong Country. Sometimes developers have grand ideas for their games, but when it comes to the final release, they may have overlooked some important details, leading to bugs and the like. This can range in scope from massively detrimental and game-breaking glitches to perhaps not that big of a deal because the issue is hidden away behind some sort of game mode that most players don't even know is there. Such is the case with Super Mario Kart. In the game, there's actually a secret CPU ghost mode which can be accessed under the time trial menu by simply pressing start on the controller in port 2 while selecting a driver. This triggers a CPU cursor to appear, allowing the player to select a ghost driver to compete against. This is where a unique glitch can come up, as these CPU ghosts are capable of interacting with elements of the track's mechanics, such as the ice blocks found in Vanilla Lake. By selecting a CPU ghost to race against and allowing the CPU to destroy these blocks, if the player player then drives over where these blocks were and then saves this new race as a ghost, an oversight will present itself. In this new ghost race, the ghost will vanish when it touches the block that was supposed to have been destroyed and trigger a bizarre visual error in which the player's tires will cycle between 2 frames of animation even while in an idle position. This error only comes up when using the same driver as the ghost, however. The SNES was a bit of a juggernaut when it came to racing games, with Mario Kart being a great example of how the system utilized its pseudo 3D Mode 7 effect to create the illusion of depth by manipulating a 2D plane. The same can't be said for the original NES, unfortunately, with even Nintendo of America being rather scathing about one particular release, Famicom Grand Prix 2 3D Hot Rally. Kazunoubu Shimizu had worked on the game as a designer and revealed that Famicom Grand Prix 2 was the game that inspired him to create what many consider one of the best racing games on the Super Nintendo, as well as one of the best uses of Mode 7, F-Zero. During an interview, Shimizu revealed that he and his team showed Grand Prix 2 to Nintendo of America and they, quote, totally bashed it, and that they told him, this isn't a racing game, racing cars should be cooler, and that it would fail to sell. This awakened a fighting spirit in the would-be director of F-Zero, who thought, well, if that's what you say, then I'll make something really cool. We can all get stuck in a game from time to time, and Super Metroid is one of those titles that can be a nightmare to navigate. Trying to find where you need to go is tricky when you don't have any sort of map to guide you, but there was a map created by one of the game's Japanese developers for their own reference. In 2018, this developer map was scanned by Tighe and uploaded to Metroid database. Some of the details on this map demonstrate changes made to the game during its creation, such as Crocomire being listed as Tokera, derived from the word for melt, Tokeru, and what could be construed as a pun for the name Godzilla. Gojira, Tokeru, Gojira, Tokera, essentially melting lizard. It wouldn't be surprising, since it's already well known that the devs were big fans of the monster movies. Phantoon is another example, with its name on the map being Obaken, derived from the word for ghost or phantom, Obake. So Phantoon is actually a pretty decent way of demonstrating that. This map actually has a deeper history within Nintendo too, having later been used by Nintendo's gameplay counselors in the United States. If a gamer wound up getting stuck, they could call up these counselors for advice on what to do next. While Super Metroid has no difference between its Japanese and US releases, at least when it comes to the room layout, Nintendo was still concerned that if the counselors referenced this map for their guidance, they may wind up giving players misinformation, as those in charge weren't completely sure if there were any differences between the 2 language versions of the game. However, even with the ban having been put on place on the use of this map, counselors would still use it anyway, just in secret, hiding copies of the map in the backs of their information binders. One game actually did receive a substantial change between regions, and arguably one that ruined the entire experience in the English release, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja featuring Goemon. When porting the game overseas, the team decided to make a cut in Warlock Zone 3. In the original Japanese version of the game, a show would play out on screen, performed by Ebisumaru, known as Dr. Yang in the English version, who would dance around for a little while before dropping trowel and letting out a little fart. What's curious about this scene is that while entirely optional, it was referenced in the English release's instruction manual with the name Sammy Rise Circus Sideshow. It was even included in issue number 33 of Nintendo Power, and even in a Prima guide, which means that it was likely removed sometime between having been distributed to media for coverage and its final release. Another show was removed from Warlock Zone 6, where in the original release, it was possible to enter a geisha strip club, and even the option of watching a strip show. Though, sorry to disappoint everyone, there is no explicit pixel nudity to be seen. The biggest insult is removing the fart scene though, because that is definitely peak humor right there. On the subject of comedy, swearing is something that most children find inherently hilarious, regardless of its context. In The Secret of Evermore, it seems that the American team at Squaresoft knew their audience of rebellious gamers would be keen to insert any profanity into the game they can. So, they prepared a special prize for anyone who happens to have entered their name as the F word, specifically with the correct grammar as a proper noun using a capital F. At one stage in the game, the player will be faced with having to cross an alarmingly large desert on foot, with the only option of transportation being a skeleton sand sailor who will transport the player on his boat for the price of just 1 amulet of annihilation. However, if the player has their name set to the F word, he will instead up his price to 3 amulets, citing his distaste for foul language as a justification for his steep price. But this is far from the only secret in the game. There's a reference in the introduction in the town of Podunk, where the store can be seen with the name Tighe Software. This is actually a double barrel reference, both to the software retail company Egghead Software, who ran from 1984 until 2001, as well as to the game's executive producer and creator of Lode Runner, Doug Smith. Smith may even be the reason that Secret of Evermore exists at all, according to the lead programmer Brian Fadrau, who credits him with the conception of the game, and who explained that Squaresoft hired Smith based on his proposal for an RPG with an American motif. The Japanese RPG giant loved this idea, and so they set the team to work on creating a game like Secret of Mana with Western themes. And what could be more American than a small boy traveling through time, making references to American pop culture, all while dressed as Marty McFly from Back to the Future. When it comes to Japanese games though, sometimes the region doesn't quite get the full experience we do over in the West. Mortal Kombat 2 is a game that many will know for its early gory details, with characters being torn limb from limb and bleeding profusely all over the place. For this game's Japanese release, however, much of the gore has been censored, with all of the blood having been recolored to green, while all of the game's iconic fatality moves, with the exception of the stage fatalities, causing the game to become temporarily monochrome. Mortal Kombat is of course a Western developed game, so at least Japan was lucky enough to even receive a release, a privilege we often didn't have over here when it came to games created over there. While Squaresoft has created and released a number of popular JRPGs and had them ported to the West, like the monumentous Final Fantasy franchise, this wasn't always a given when it came to their standalone titles. Live Alive is one of these games, a title that mostly received recognition outside of Japan from die-hard JRPG enthusiasts, partly thanks to fan translations released during the early days of the budding fan community. Many moons later, it would be given a full English localization with its remake for the Nintendo Switch. Those who have played the game will know that it birthed a fairly unique concept in the JRPG genre, with gameplay taking place across a variety of short stories with their own environments and characters, rather than one extensive continuous plot that can rack up tens of hours to complete. Takashi Takita, the game's director, was asked in a 1994 interview for Famicom Sushin magazine what it was that made him want to create the game. He responded that his main idea spawned from Square's work on previous franchises like Final Fantasy and Hanjuku Hero, and now he wanted to change the formula to something fresh. From here, his concept of a World Select screen was born, with the hope that he could breathe some fresh air into a genre that had been mostly stretched to its conceptual limit at this point. This would also provide a lease of new life for the team's development process, with the possibility that it may even enlarge the scope of the gameplay. Many would agree that, in the end, his concept worked rather well in its execution. Before they were bought out by Square, Quest were the development team behind Ogre Battle, a tactical RPG series that saw its initial publication on the NES. While a Japanese developed game, its world feels far more encompassing than just the East. In fact, many of the game's locations are not actually inspired by Japanese cities, but rather Brazilian states. This includes the state of Acre, found in the Amazon rainforest, and Para, while others were renamed. Goiás was based on Goiás, Matgro based on Mato Grosso, Lolaimia based on Roraima, Melanion based on Maranhão, Rodnia based on Rodonia, Alagoas based on Alagoas, and Selgip based on Sergipe. Apologies to our Portuguese speakers out there. While these names were kept across the game's different localization, the American release of the game had the name Selgip changed to Vir. But as a result of this, there's an oversight in the game when an NPC will still mention this location by its original name. Changing gears a bit, the horror genre didn't really kick off until the next generation of games, with the more realistic graphics of the PlayStation being able to truly make players feel a deeper sense of dread. But the Super Nintendo was a bit of an early adopter of the genre, touting titles like La Place Normale and of course Clock Tower. Clock Tower's most recognized fright is the game's murdering psychopath, Scissorman. But according to Hifumi Kuno, the game's director, Scissorman may not have been as unique to the franchise as some people might think. His appearance and signature blades were hugely inspired by another horrifying figure found in the film The Burning. Kuno stated, "The idea of Scissorman's blades comes from watching the movie The Burning when I was a child. A scary backlit silhouette of a murderous demon with his garden shears sent shivers down my spine. At least he wasn't inspired by Edward Scissorhands." There's no faulting someone for taking inspiration from something striking, but sometimes inspiration might just be straight up taking. In the case of Demon's Crest, the game's official soundtrack was included as part of a collection containing the music for the various games in the Ghosts and Goblins franchise, with it having been a spin-off. However, none of the game's music had official titles prior to this release, and it seems that some of the titles chosen weren't originally from an official source either. The music's track names were all created by a user of SNESmusic.org named SquareTex, and it appears that Capcom just took the unofficial fan names for this official physical release. Whether or not the company was aware that these names were made up by the fans is another matter, but one can assume that they just believed that they were the original names created by the game's composer. Speaking of the game's composer, the musician was actually unknown for a long time due to the lack of a credit sequence. Many had assumed that the game was composed by Yuki Iwai, who worked on the previous game in the series, Gargoyle's Quest II. She'd also composed music for Mega Man X alongside Toshihiko Horiyama, and wound up being the sole composer for Mega Man X2. However, the veil of confusion was lifted when this musical collection was released, with Ippo Yamada, the game's sound designer, confirming that it was in fact Toshihiko Horiyama who composed the game's score, and had previously worked on a number of games in the Mega Man series. There was a time when the Mega Man series was considered a Nintendo console staple, before the character's expansion into the wider gaming market. In Mega Man 7 on the SNES, it seems the devs at Capcom wanted to pay respects to the system's predecessor in Japan, the Famicom. At the very beginning of Junkman stage, it's possible to see what looks like a Famicom hanging from the ceiling, though not quite matching the same design as its real-world counterpart. Early versions of the game reveal that this design was altered at some stage, however, with the original version looking significantly more like the original system, with the final retail release having been rounded off at the corners and slightly disguised. This bizarre Mega Man version of the Famicom even appears multiple times in the background of this stage, but was likely overlooked by many fans at the time. It wouldn't just be Nintendo's home console that wound up getting some love in a mysterious place in this game though, as commanding Rush to search in a spot that doesn't have anything in it has a chance of him actually digging up the original Game Boy handheld. Some things in games need time before they're fully recognized, whether the developers wanted them to be acknowledged or not. Star Trek: The Next Generation was perhaps one of the most quintessential 90s sci-fi TV shows, so the fact that there'd be a collection of games for the series is no shocker, like with the SNES title Futures Past. Over the years, it became much easier to acknowledge the fact that lots of the still images from the game are actually digitized screens taken from a wide array of episodes from the TV series. This includes scenes like the still frame of Captain Picard in his ready room, which appears in the episode Lonely Among Us, while an image of Dr. Crusher providing aid to an injured crew member is from The Battle. Sometimes the show might just have a shot worth using for the game, but with the cast's appearance changing over the show's story, some alterations had to be made for certain scenes, like this still frame of the crew hanging out in the observation lounge, which comes from a scene in Season 1, episode The Neutral Zone, requiring the artist to make changes to both Troy and Worf's uniforms, as well as painting the iconic gruff beard on Riker's face. While these shots all show crew members iconic to the next generation, the game also features a number of crewmates who were original characters just for this title. These characters were all named and modelled around the likeness of the team behind the game's creation. There was even a character based on the editor of the Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, Ed Shemrad, either as a form of appreciation for his work, or perhaps as a way of trying to convince him to give the game a solid presence in the magazine. Who knows? Checking back to the EGM issue of the game's release reveals that there is an extensive article covering the game, but without any mention of Ed Shemrad's appearance in the game at all. Curious. It's possible, of course, that the team at EGM wanted to keep this cameo a secret, as some secrets can remain undiscovered in a game for some time.
Did you know? Super Mario RPG was partially inspired by a Japanese children's toy. According to one of Mario RPG's directors, Yoshihiko Maekawa, the toy was similar to a laptop, and the buttons on the toy had to be pressed in time with music. Maekawa told IGN, "It was that idea, having gameplay built around timing pressing buttons, that inspired me to hybridize these two genres to get a little bit of action and RPG into the same game." At the game's first meeting, Square presented Nintendo with an image of Mario on horseback, equipped with a sword and cape. It was essentially a fusion of Square's Final Fantasy Fantasy style, and Mario. The illustration didn't sit well with Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who immediately said, "That's not right." Miyamoto and one of Mario RPG's directors, Chihiro Fujioka, went back and forth on the issue. They discussed whether the game should have a classic RPG approach with swords and magic, or if Mario should use his iconic jump attacks and hammer. They couldn't decide between the two, so they let the fans decide. Fujioka told Retro Gamer, "We had to decide on Mario's fighting style. I said, let's just decide his fighting style based on how much the audience applauds." Fujioka commented on both fighting styles, and the audience cheered more for Mario using jumps and hammers. Other drastic changes in direction took place early in production. One example is the pseudo 3D art style, which didn't exist at all near the start of development. Mario RPG initially used a top-down map with a 2D style Mario. The game received a pre-rendered isometric overhaul after some experimentation with 3D. There were also plans to include a shape-shifting boss character in the second half of the game. Code for the villain was even programmed into the game, and several sketches were drawn. Though the boss was cut, the ideas behind it could have influenced the fight against Smithy. Originally, the team wanted Mario to use devices that would impact devices in other parts of the world, causing a type of domino effect. Chain reaction was a key phrase the team used during development. This eventually led to the game's action events, where light platforming and other real-time set pieces occurred throughout the game. Speaking of which, the team struggled to balance the amount of action. They wondered how much traditional Mario gameplay could be present in an RPG without it feeling out of place. Though production was sometimes difficult, Square and Nintendo worked well together. Ex-Square president Hisashi Suzuki approached Nintendo about making a sequel before Mario RPG was even released, but due to Square leaning away from Nintendo in favor of the PlayStation, a similar collaboration never took place on the Nintendo 64. Luigi was planned to be in the game, as seen in an early issue of Nintendo Power. Many other elements were changed or scrapped during development. Some examples are the Chancellor looking gray and much older, Frogfucius' island being closer to the land and therefore not accessed via Tadpole Bridge, an encounter with Bowser in his keep at an unknown time, an unused underwater battle stage, and a lot of enemies, most of which were reskinned versions of existing foes. There's also a hidden boss named Culex, who is an homage to Square's Final Fantasy series. Though he isn't from Final Fantasy himself, he embodies many traits of the franchise. He has a sprite for both overworld and battle like the Final Fantasy enemies, and his in-battle sprite doesn't change when attacking or being struck. Culex's in-battle sprite also looks more 2D than 3D. A remixed version of Final Fantasy IV's boss battle music plays during the fight, and the Final Fantasy victory fanfare is heard after it. Culex's Japanese name is also Kuri Sutara, meaning crystaller. This isn't the only nod to Final Fantasy. Caesar Dragon gets his name from an unused Final Fantasy super boss. The unused boss is called Caesar Dragon in the game's ROM, but both enemies are called Kaiser Dragon in Japanese. The boss was eventually used in the Game Boy Advance port of Final Fantasy VI and was renamed Kaiser Dragon in the West. The enemy Bahamut is a reference to the Final Fantasy summon of the same name. This isn't true for the Japanese version, however, where the enemy has a Yoshi-inspired name, Doshi. Final Fantasy isn't the only game referenced in Super Mario RPG. Both The Legend of Zelda's Link and Metroid's Samus have cameo appearances. Link can be found at the Rosetown Inn, and Samus can be seen in Toadstool's castle. Samus is also featured as an action figure in Booster Tower. Models of Captain Falcon and Samurai Goro's vehicles from F-Zero, as well as an R-Wing from Star Fox, can be found in Barrel Volcano. The Axum Rangers are a parody of the heroes from Super Sentai, a long-running Japanese show which was the basis for the Power Rangers franchise. Translator Ted Woolsey originally wanted to squeeze more references into the game. Woolsey asked if he could name Punchinello James Bond in reference to James Bond, but management shot down his request. A remnant of the idea is seen when Punchinello introduces himself. The name's Nello, Punchinello. Boshi's Japanese name is Washi. This makes him Yoshi's Wadui counterpart, similar to how Wario is Mario's counterpart. Bowser's victory pose was also changed in the English game, as it previously resembled the up yours gesture. Lakitu's Japanese name is Juggem. His bust features the initials JB, which remained unchanged in the English version. They simply stand for Juggem's bus. In the Japanese version of the game, going into the menu screen and entering down, up, right, left, select, start, B will make Toad appear. He'll say, "Secret code found. Now let's take a look at your status." Wow, nothing's changed at all. But what about your experience points? Nope, nothing's changed. There's no point in looking for other codes, and the result will always be the same. I'll play with you as many times as you like though. Secret code, end. In the English version, Gino introduces himself as heart, note, exclamation mark, question mark. In the Japanese game, however, Gino's name is introduced as a completely unpronounceable series of symbols he refers to as Star Language. Gino was a surprise hit among fans, and even grew a cult following. Mario RPG's developers didn't know about this fondness until years later, presumably due to a language barrier and the obscurity of early internet. Fujioka told Retro Gamer, "I only found out about Gino's popularity later, so I got him to make a reappearance in Superstar Saga."
In this episode, we'll be exploring trivia for a variety of titles from the 16-bit worldwide hit, the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Famicom, was the follow-up to Nintendo's first major delve into the gaming hardware market. Coming after the NES, the Super Nintendo had a lot to live up to, and it certainly had its fair share of hype leading up to its release. Nintendo's competition had begun to pave the way for the next generation in Japan, with Sega's Mega Drive and NEC's PC Engine having already been released. Launching on November 21st, 1990, Nintendo seemed almost held back with the approach to launching the SNES on their home turf. Despite the popularity of the Super Nintendo's predecessor, the company shipped only 300,000 SNES units to retail, an incredibly small figure considering the audience waiting in anticipation. Being a shock to literally no one, all 300,000 units had sold within hours of the system's launch. To give more gravity to this small figure, at the end of its life cycle, the SNES sold 50 million units. The original NES had sold around 30 million units in the US alone by 1991, a figure which demonstrates Nintendo's strong insight into how much they knew their consoles can sell. The SNES, at the time of release in Japan, had 1.5 million pre-orders, and Nintendo had made the decision to inform the public of the scarcity of the much sought-after console, shipping only 20% of consoles that people had already paid for, leading to major panic amongst consumers. The day of release, November 21st, was a Wednesday, leading to a significant number of people opting to ditch work to get their hands on this rare item. With so many consumers rushing to the streets of Tokyo to get their hands on the system, the city became overcrowded and cost the Japanese economy millions of dollars. Looking at this, it's hard to deny that the system was extremely popular. One of the most popular titles on the system was Super Mario World. The game became so loved that it actually had its own anime adaptation, titled Mario to Yoshi no Bokenland, meaning Mario and Yoshi's Adventureland. Released exclusively for Japanese audiences in 1992, the 28-minute animation was created for Bandai's VHS system called the Terabiko. The Terabiko was a sort of interactive VHS device, released in the US as See and Say Videophone. The device had a similar appearance to that of a telephone and was connected directly to a TV or VCR and had 4 color-coded buttons. Tapes for the system would send out encoded audio signals which would be picked up by the phone to recognize the user's response, providing outcomes for both correct and incorrect answers. The animation's events differ from those of the game and have Mario asking the viewer to answer several simple questions aimed towards young children. Other Mario games on the Super Nintendo also have interesting tidbits, such as Mario World's sequel, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Nintendo's North American advertisements in this era were known to be edgy and crude, but this style was arguably taken too far for Yoshi's Island. One commercial for the original Super Nintendo game featured a man at a restaurant eating enough food until he literally explodes. Besides being disgusting, it's also believed that this is a reference to the Mr. Creosote sketch from the 1983 movie Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. Another Mario game for the SNES is Super Mario All-Stars, which was an enhanced compilation of Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, and The Lost Levels. In the Mario 2 portion of the game, the final boss was originally going to be slightly different. The Wart boss fight was originally going to have the player throw tomato projectiles like in Super Mario Bros. 2. However, these were replaced with peppers in the final game, with the tomato sprite still being present but unused in the game's data. Another huge Nintendo franchise that dominated the Super Nintendo was Donkey Kong with the Donkey Kong Country sub-series. According to Country's director Greg Mayles in a discussion with Girard the completionist Khalil, Cranky's infamous line, "I did this using one life and I took less than an hour," during the credits sequence was the last remnant of a scrapped mode. In this mode, the player would be able to play as Cranky Kong, who would be much slower and perform poorly in general compared to Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong. This makes it all the more fitting that Cranky Kong eventually became playable himself in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Nintendo Wii U and Switch. Several animated features were adapted into games, such as Disney's The Lion King. This game was very popular with gamers, selling over 1 million units in the United States alone. The original film score had been composed by Hans Zimmer, which was adapted to the SNES audio chips by Frank Klepacki. Hans Zimmer's studio was actually so impressed with the game's audio that they sent a letter to Klepacki, complimenting him on the soundtrack for the SNES release. One Super Nintendo game didn't receive the same positive response from Pixar, however. Uniracers, released as Unirally in PAL territories, was published by Nintendo, and created by DMA Design, who would later go on to become Rockstar Games. The game has players race riderless unicycles on a 2D side-scrolling track, performing stunts in order to gain speed. It wasn't long after the game's release that DMA Design was sued by Pixar for allegedly copying Pixar's designs for the game's unicycle and their concept from the 1987 short Red's Dream. DMA Design lost their lawsuit to the animation firm, forcing Nintendo to halt production of future Uniracer cartridges, meaning that only the game's initial run was ever sold, totaling just 300,000 units. Commenting on the matter with Nintendo Life, developer Mike Daly stated, "We modeled the unicycle exactly based on a real-life unicycle. The problem with Pixar was that they seemed to think that any computer-generated unicycle was owned by them. They took footage from Red's Dream and compared it to Unirally, and the unicycles were virtually the same. This isn't a big surprise, as there's not a lot of ways you can bring life to a unicycle without looking like the one Pixar did." The judge, being the moron that he was, agreed. While it was a unicycle and it did look similar, I think he should have looked at the game as a whole. If he had, then he would have noticed that the game was a completely different environment and the character of the unicycle just wasn't the same. From one, what I suppose you could call a sports game, to another, considered one of the best basketball games on the system, NBA Jam actually hides a dirty little secret. Developer Mark Tamel, a self-proclaimed die-hard Detroit Pistons fan, admitted in 2008 to ESPN that he'd actually rigged the game in his beloved team's favor. When asked if Scottie Pippen of the Bulls would have reduced stats when playing against certain teams, Tamel stated, "It's true, but only when the Bulls played the Pistons. If there was a close game and anyone on the Bulls took a last-second shot, we wrote a special code in the game so that they would average out to be bricks. There was a big competition back in the day between the Pistons and the Bulls, and since I was always a big Pistons fan, that was my opportunity to level the playing field." Yet another sports game with a secret within its code is NHL 96, which was developed by Tiburon Entertainment and published by EA. A secret message was included at the beginning of the title's ROM data aimed towards hackers and demo scene coders, reading, "If you're a talented programmer or artist, please fax us your resume to 407-862-4077. Although formal education is a plus, it's not required. This message is directed to all you hackers and demo coders out there who might be looking through our ROMs. We have good benefits and pay competitive wages. We understand that while your resume may not reflect jobs programming, that you may still be very talented and the opportunity may not have been available. In this case, we ask you to mail us your demos or examples of work you have done. Tiburon Entertainment, CO, hey, I'm good and I want a job, 900 Fox Valley Drive, Suite 202, Longwood, Florida." If you grew up with classic games, you will know all too well the pain of progressing deep into a game and finding out it's time to stop playing, only to realize the game has no save files or password system. Save features for cartridge games make use of small batteries on the game's circuit board, and with batteries only having so much juice in their lifespan, the save feature of many games will no longer function without replacing that battery. One player, Wanikun, made use of a different method for keeping their progress, simply not turning off the system for 20 years. The game Wanikun played for so long is Umihara Kawase, released exclusively in Japan for the Super Famicom before releasing on Steam internationally many years later. The cartridge and console were both left on, with the exception of one occasion when Wanikun had to move home.
Did you know? The original Donkey Kong Country was planned to have an opening cutscene. Rare designer Greg Mayles shared some of the game's documents over Twitter, one of which would have told the events of the game's story. A storyboard showed Kremlings putting Diddy in a barrel and stealing the banana horde, with the hole leading to the horde made by a Krusha breaking in. This was explained in the final game through the instruction manual, and the cutscene later made its way into the remake on Game Boy Advance. A document dating back to August 1993 showed a wide range of concepts for the game's animal buddies. Ideas included a flying pig, a mole who'd dig underground, and an owl who'd give out information information. A name sheet from March 94 shows the latter two were named Hooter and Miney. Neither made the final cut, though a similar pig design later appeared in Donkey Kong Land with the Hogwash enemy. The sheet also shows Candy Kong had alternate names Blondie Kong and Honey Kong, and that prior to Country, the game was then known as Donkey Kong's Monkey Mayhem. Other design docs showed keys playing a role in unlocking extras. Animal buddies would be locked in cages and could only be freed with a key that resembled the animal, and the same applied for extra lives. They thought about doing this for Diddy Kong, then known as Junior, but decided it was better if he was readily available. Barrels were used in Country, being a carryover from the arcade series that felt appropriate in the new universe. Donkey Kong's Tighe also came from the suggestion of Nintendo veteran Shigeru Miyamoto and debuted in Donkey Kong on Game Boy, released several months before Country. Mails also expanded on how a typical level was made. The team would think of ideas for enemies and features and draw them out on post-it notes before putting it all together with items and bonuses. Level concepts shared included Country's first level, Jungle Hijinks, as well as Toxic Tower and Animal Antics from Country 2. The game's music also had a similar process starting off. When composer David Wise was brought on for the soundtrack, he believed it was just a temporary job and someone at Nintendo would eventually do the score. For his demo, he made 3 pieces of music to present to Rare co-founder Tim Stamper. Liking all 3, Tim asked Wise to combine the samples into one track, with that theme becoming DK Island Swing, used in the jungle levels. Contrary to popular belief, Wise wasn't the sole composer for the project. Evelyn Novakovic also helped with the score, and one track was adapted from Robin Beanland, a track originally for Killer Instinct that became the theme for Funky Kong. According to Rare, DKC had the most man-hours put into a single video game at the time, spanning 22 years across the development team. It was also the first Nintendo product launched in the UK before all other regions, released on November 18th, and by 4 PM the following day it already raked in £1 million. To this day, it stands as Rare's best-selling game and the 3rd bestseller for the Super Nintendo, second only to Super Mario All-Stars and Mario World. The game had a marketing budget of $3.76 million, and one product to come from it was a VHS called DKC Exposed, sent to subscribers of Nintendo Power. Featured in the video for a few seconds is Michael Kelbaugh, then product tester for Nintendo, who would later go on to become the current president of Retro Studios, an eventual developer for the Donkey Kong series. In honor of DKC2's 20th anniversary, Mails once again shared early concepts he had for the sequel. One had the character Clubba as boss of the Lost World before being swapped with K. Rool, with some of his attacks being used by the World 2 boss Cudgel in the final game. Another was to find an exclusive cheat code in Cranky's museum to be used for the SNES port of Killer Instinct. The museum still features a KI arcade cabinet, plus a poster of Fighter Chief Thunder. Cranky's tent in the Kremland overworld map also reads KI here, surrounded by several Killer Instinct machines. When the team decided to give Diddy Kong a girlfriend, they were concerned the established DK Candy Kong pairing would clash with it, so the two were stashed away for the sequel, with Candy being completely absent. Dixie Kong was also known as Diddy Ann throughout most of the game's pre-production, and much like when trying to pinpoint a title for the game, there were many potential names for Dixie that Mails referred to as of mixed quality. Names ranged from Didette, Darlene, and Dee Dee to less serious names like Dicky Licky, Demigod, and Dem Girls They All Love Me. Banana animals were another concept Mails drew up, serving as a way to score additional bananas. The banana bird did make its way into DKC3, though they served an entirely different purpose, and the game was handled by another internal team at Rare. Though sold to Microsoft come 2002, Rare was still permitted to make games for Nintendo's handhelds as Microsoft had no stake in that market. As such, they were allowed to remake the Country trilogy on Game Boy Advance starting in 2003. In 2011, an ex-Rare employee under the pseudonym Stampers got in touch with fansite DKVine and talked about the trilogy's development. All 3 games were completely coded from scratch. The original game assets were on floppy disks, though Rare could barely make out the file formats of what they still had. To get the look of the originals on the Advance, the artists used SNES emulators and went through each game frame by frame, taking snapshots along the way. They added extra frames not present in the originals to smooth out certain animations and had redone all backgrounds from the ground up. Another issue was getting the physics to match the SNES counterparts 1-to-1. Stampers expanded on this, saying, "There'd be times where QA reports would come back saying something like, in the original you could do a rolling jump off the edge of this ledge and reach that ledge, but you can't on the GBA one, so we'd adjust it until it worked, then get a bunch of reports saying, you can reach this area by rolling and jumping, and you're not supposed to. They also addressed problems of the original controls, notably with Ellie the Elephant and the toboggan from Country 3, as well as the overall flow of the level design. The handheld team felt like they truly got the hang of it by the release of the third game, and thought about following up with a 2.5D sequel on the Nintendo DS, tentatively titled Donkey Kong Country 4, though Stampers had said it was nothing more than just an idea they threw out there, opting to do a remake of Diddy Kong Racing instead. For Country 3's remake, an entirely new soundtrack was done by David Wise, with the originals done primarily by Novakovic. The team were hoping to have both soundtracks available in the game, but it proved to be too much work and little cartridge space by the end of the project. Amidst the new content, it also features several boat mini-games at Funky's Rentals, all of which are based on levels of Rare's NES game Cobra Triangle. The games Destroy, Disarm, Protect, and Race are closely structured to their inspirations, and debug text even refers to the music track for the games as Cobra Track.
Did you know? Star Fox grew from a prototype originally designed by Argonaut Games for NES. Its codename was NES Glider, inspired by Argonaut's previous game for Atari ST and Amiga, Star Glider. After showing the game to Nintendo, first on the NES and then a few weeks later on the Super Nintendo, Argonaut founder Jess San told the Japanese developer that their prototype was the best 3D work that could be done without a custom chipset. Impressed by the work that they had so far, Nintendo gave Argonaut the go-ahead to develop the chipset they needed. The result of their endeavors was the Super FX chip, with Star Fox being the first game designed around it. Shigeru Miyamoto and Katsuya Eguchi were tasked with designing the core gameplay for Star Fox. The series' anthropomorphic animals stem from Miyamoto's lack of interest in franchises with traditional humans and realistic sci-fi stories. The concept of having a fox as the main character, and the idea of flying through rings, came from Miyamoto visiting the shrine of Fushimi Inari Taisha, which was located near Nintendo of Japan's headquarters. The Inari is a Japanese deity that's often depicted as a fox, and its shrines typically have many arches to walk through, similar to obstacles found in the Star Fox series. Two other characters, Falco Lombardi and Peppy Hare, are likewise said to be inspired by Japanese folklore, though the game's developers haven't specified which myths they're based on. The personalities of the four members of the Star Fox team are roughly based on a few of the game's developers. Miyamoto is Fox, the game's 3D model designer Tsuyoshi Watanabe is Falco, Slippy is assistant director Yoichi Yamada, and Peppy is game director Katsuya Eguchi. The character Pigma Dengar was once part of the Star Fox team, but left to join Star Wolf. Pigma's family name, Dengar, is a reference to the Kansai dialect of Japan. In Kansai, people have a quirk where they often end their sentences with the word Dengar. It's also possible that the character General Pepper is a reference to the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. As well as the obvious use of the word Pepper, sergeants and generals are both ranks used in military forces, and General Pepper wears an outfit very similar to the one George Harrison wore on the cover of the album. The character Rob 64 is called NUS 64 in Japan, a reference to the Nintendo Ultra 64, the original name given to the Nintendo 64 console. In Europe, Star Fox was renamed to Starwing due to the similarity in pronunciation to the German company Starvox. Later titles would also lose the Star Fox moniker in Europe, including Star Fox 64, which was titled Lilat Wars. As part of the game's marketing campaign, Nintendo released a promotional cartridge titled Super Star Fox Weekend Official Competition that was showcased in malls and game retailers across the US and Europe. It featured a time attack of 3 levels, a shortened version of the Corneria and Asteroid stages, and a bonus level made specifically for the cartridge. The contest ran from April 30th to May 2nd in 1993, and prizes included jackets, t-shirts, and trips to international locations. After the competition, a limited number of cartridges were made available for purchase in Nintendo Power's 1994 Super Power Supply catalog. Star Fox was a breakout success, selling almost 3 million copies during its publishing run. Nintendo's confidence in the sales potential of the new IP led them stockpiling an unprecedented 1.7 million carts ready for launch.
Before his work on the Zelda series, Eiji Ayanuma worked as a graphic designer at Nintendo. He managed to get an interview with the company after graduating and was able to show examples of his work directly to Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto. Ayanuma managed to impress and was put to work making pixel art for Nintendo games. Before he got the chance to work on a Zelda game, Ayanuma had the opportunity to direct his own Nintendo title. This game was Marvelous: Another Treasure Island. Marvelous was released towards the end of 1996, and while it's easy to draw clear similarities between Marvelous and the Zelda series, their differences become clear almost immediately. Rather than focusing on action, the game has more of an emphasis on puzzles. Combining popular gameplay mechanics of its time, the game feels like a combination of Zelda and The Lost Vikings, with PC adventure game elements mixed in. Taking control of 3 characters in a team named by the player, the aim is to solve various puzzles and traverse further across the world. To do this, it's required to use all 3 characters as both a team and individually, utilizing their unique traits and items. At any time while walking around, the player can investigate items both near and far with the use of a cursor. This often changes the view to a more detailed first-person perspective, where more information can be given to the player. This can range from talking to characters or investigating objects. During these screens, it's also possible to use items or make use of combined team actions to proceed. This can vary from positioning characters to lift or push objects that lay in their way, or performing unique actions to suit their situation, such as stacking to reach things. Items can also change up gameplay. For example, one character will obtain a baseball glove and ball, which can hit various items and enemies, something which up to this point in the game is not possible. The game's plot follows 3 young boys, Dion, Jack, and Max. Dion is a heart of gold rascal who tends to lead the group. Jack is considered to be the intellectual in the group, and Max is the strongest. The trio are camping with their class on a mysterious island when they uncover a disturbance. A legendary pirate, Captain Maverick, has hidden treasure on the island known as Marvelous, which can only be found by those willing to complete supposedly unsolvable puzzles. The boys use their wits to prove the legend wrong, while also discovering a band of pirates who want the treasure for themselves. While sounding particularly simple, a variety of bizarre and imaginative situations unfold throughout the game. Before the game's full retail release, another game in the series was published through Nintendo's Satellaview system. BS Marvelous Time Athletic came out at the start of 1996, followed by the game's full retail release. The retail game was followed by yet another Satellaview game called BS Marvelous Camp Arnold. These Satellaview releases act more as side quests to the main game. Rather than follow the standard style of adventure gameplay, the titles work more as a children's activity known as stamp rallies in Japan. The goal is to visit a list of locations on a sheet of paper and use various stamps located at each one to mark them off. The Satellaview games also made use of a system known as SoundLink, which streams the soundtrack to the console rather than storing it locally. While this has led to issues in the past with Satellaview titles losing their soundtracks, old recordings of the BS Marvelous games can be found online by YouTube user 1983 Parrothead. The Marvelous games also made use of the SoundLink system to provide voice acting to these side games. During an interview with Spike regarding A Link Between Worlds, Aonuma mentioned how Marvelous came to be. Aonuma was inspired by A Link to the Past, and credits the title as sparking his interest in game development. He felt that changing the game world by cutting grass and bushes, even for a short period, was something special. This experience led to his work on Marvelous. Marvelous's resemblance to Zelda was so apparent that after seeing the project, Miyamoto proclaimed, "If you really want to make a Zelda game that bad, why don't you just actually make a Zelda game?" The next title Aonuma would help design was Ocarina of Time. When asked if Aonuma would ever revisit Marvelous or consider publishing the title outside of Japan, he stated, "It would be cool to have it on the Virtual Console, but we'd also have to localize the game, so it might be kind of difficult. And we'd have to do it with superimposed subtitles, because we can't actually remake the game at this point and actually get the data." Despite this, a fan translation of the game was created by Dak R and Tashi. This patch has been updated several times, and its latest release has totally converted all Japanese into English. This includes graphical changes as well as the dialogue. Aonuma's statement of not being able to edit the title is of course proven false by the mere existence of this patch, but his reluctance is still understandable. Virtual Console releases, which were originally exclusive to Japan, tend to keep their original Japanese script. This has very few exceptions, though games like Monster World 4 did receive a full translation. The reason for the game's lack of release outside Japan is likely due to the Nintendo 64's release. Marvelous Another Treasure Island was published in 1996 after the Nintendo 64 had already been released, and, as a result, a full translation and release on a dying Super Nintendo would have been an unwise move. With that said, the game was featured in Nintendo Power and received a full 4 pages of coverage. In this article, Dion was given a different name and was instead called Dino. This could indicate that plans were made for the game to be taken overseas. Another interesting aspect of this story is that Nintendo may have also had plans to continue the series. Navi Trackers, a side game available in the Japanese release of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, plays similarly to the original Satellaview Marvelous games. It sees the players competing to collect stamps before their opponents. This side game even has voice acting. Darkling Kale from the Cutting Room Floor discovered unused data within this segment of the game, which reveals some very interesting information. The data includes character icons of Dion in various colors, an unused render of Ms. Gina with some luck rocks which would have appeared on the TV to show the players where each stamp would be, and exact replicas of maps found within BS Marvelous Time Athletic. The game we're covering today comes from a company best known as the creators of Pokemon, Game Freak. We've already covered one of their titles on this channel with Mario and Wario, but they had another game for the Super Nintendo that was never published in America. That game is Bushi Seiyuden Futari no Yusha, which roughly translates as Warriors of the Blue Dragon Legend, The Two Heroes. Before talking about why the product never came to the West, let's take a look at the game itself. Published in 1997 by T&E Soft, Game Freak's Bushi Seiyuden is a unique blend of RPG genres. The player takes control of the game's protagonist in a fantasy-themed version of feudal Japan. While out adventuring, the hero encounters a small pink flying monster, Woku. Woku was once a girl, but has been transformed. It's her goal to find a way of reversing this transformation and becoming her true self once again. When the young swordsman's house is destroyed and his sister, Nami, is kidnapped by monsters, he seeks out to rescue her. The game's draw is in its unique gameplay. The player controls the hero through several different perspectives. These include an overhead-style RPG, like that of The Legend of Zelda. From this perspective, you are able to navigate the world, visit towns, cut down grass, discover treasures, and find dungeons. Talking to residents will initiate a first-person perspective, allowing you to look around the environment that surrounds the person you wish to speak with. And finally, entering a battle or dungeon will start a side-scrolling battle phase. While the game appears to be an action game at first glance, this isn't actually the case. Battles are turn-based, and will only continue if the player moves or attacks. But rather than using a typical menu to work through these screens, the hero is actually directly controlled like a typical action game. Battles begin by either attacking an enemy on the overhead perspective, giving the player an advantage over them, or by being ambushed by the enemy, granting them an initial first strike. After a certain period of time, once the player is strong enough, weaker enemies can be wiped out directly from the overhead map. During battles, the player takes control of not only the hero but also Woku. The hero is able to attack using a variety of sword techniques, or he can use a magical shield to defend himself. The shield is also capable of firing a bullet by using some of the player's Kokoro meter, or spirit meter, but it will only deal half of the player's standard damage. Woku is able to assist the player by lifting him into the air for a short distance, allowing him to attack enemies that are out of reach and navigate the stage. Woku can also distract some enemies and prevent them from hitting the protagonist. If knocked out, Woku can be revived after a number of turns or at the end of each fight. She is also capable of attacking enemies directly, although she will also receive damage for every turn that she is attacking. The hero also has an ability known as the Heart Eye, allowing the player to learn more about the strengths of enemies as well as being able to find hidden paths. As the game progresses, the player will learn skills that will help to attack larger quantities of enemies or deal greater damage. The main goal of the game is to destroy the Tower of the Ocean God. The Ocean God was a god that turned evil, creating a tower which connected both heaven and earth. This created a path between the world of gods and the world of men, allowing for demons to invade the planet. To destroy the tower, the player must obtain Magatama. Magatama are small curved beads which were treated as ceremonial and religious symbolic objects in the Kofun period of Japan. Visually, they appear to look similar to one half of the yin-yang symbol. Each battle has a turn limit, indicated at the start of each fight. Winning the battle within the allotted number of turns provides the player with Magatama. The quicker the fight ends, the more Magatama obtained. The most striking part of the game is its art, which is reminiscent of the Pokemon series. This is likely because Bushi Seiyuden released just after the original Pokemon games, and it had Pokemon artists Ken Sugimori and Motofumi Fujiwara work on the title. Alongside them was Pokemon composer Junichi Masuda, who worked on the game's soundtrack. And lastly, the game was designed and conceptualized by Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri. The game was originally announced under the name Magatama Densetsu, translated as Magatama Legend, and several magazines claimed that the game was to be published by Enix. It appears at some point during development, Enix dropped out of the contract due to concerns with the title's direction, and so a deal was made with T&E Soft instead. It was also published around the end of the Super Nintendo's relevancy outside of Japan, with the Nintendo 64 having been released around the same time. The game's lack of localization is probably linked to this late publishing date, as support for the Super Nintendo had begun to fizzle out by this point. Being an RPG, the game is also dialogue heavy. This would have increased the cost of translating the game and made the possibility of localization even more remote. It's also worth noting that Pokémon still hadn't reached the West by this point, and Game Freak weren't the internationally recognized developers that they are today. Surprisingly, there is also no fan translation available online at the time of this video going live.
Hello and welcome to Region Locked. Quintet are a company renowned for their RPGs published on the Super Nintendo, such as ActRaiser, Soul Blazer, and Illusion of Gaia. The president of Quintet was Tomoyoshi Miyazaki, who was also scenario writer for the first three in the Ys series. The company's main director, Masaya Hashimoto, was the programmer for those Ys titles. Their games were known for addressing darker themes, in particular the balance between life and death. These titles all had two worlds that were not only the opposite of one another, but complementary, both needing to exist for either to operate on their own. One game that follows these ideas most closely is the Japan and PAL exclusive game Terranigma. Quintet's Terranigma was published in Japan in 1995 and was released in the European and Australian markets 14 months later. The game follows the same gameplay style as previous games in what many call the Soul Blazer trilogy. The game is played from a top-down perspective and attacks are performed in real time. These moves change depending on whether the hero is running or jumping while attacking, and the player is also capable of blocking projectile attacks with the shoulder buttons. However, the player is not capable of defending against melee attacks. Throughout the game, the player obtains new equipment such as armor and weapons, as well as items that can be used to improve the player's stats. As with most RPGs, experience is gained by defeating enemies, eventually resulting in a level up which improves the player's stats. The game also uses a shop system with money dropped by enemies. Rather than the standard use of magic attacks with an MP meter, the game opts to use magical rings that can be purchased from stores. These rings can be bought with not just the money obtained from enemies, but also collected Magirocks. These are rocks found throughout the game and serve only as a tradable item. These rings are depleted after use, but will return the Magirocks to the player so that they can repurchase the rings. Additional rings also become available as the game progresses. The story of Terranigma takes place on a fictional version of Earth. However, unlike our planet, this Earth is hollow and features two distinct landscapes. On the surface, or light side, intelligent new life is born, resulting in rapid progress and development. In the underworld, or dark side, there is little besides fear and anger. These two sides came to be known as God and Devil. After billions of years of conflict between the two factions, a last stand took place on the continent of Antarctica, revealing no true victor. After the Great Battle, the continents of the surface world sank beneath the ocean, and the entrance to the underworld was sealed. The story follows Ark, a young man who grew up in the lone village of the underworld, Krista. Ark's brash nature leads him to opening a forbidden door. Within, he discovers a mysterious box from which a demon named Yomi emerges. Their meeting causes time to stand still within the village, leaving the citizens frozen in place. The only person left unaffected is the village's elder, who guides Ark to lift the curse that has befallen the other villagers. Ark then leaves his home, a first for the people of Krista, and must conquer a trial set across 5 towers, each representing a different continent of the planet. After he succeeds and life is brought back to the village, he is instructed by the village elder to travel to the light side and restore it to its former self. Ark sets off on his journey, leaving all that he knows behind. The reason behind the game's localization, and lack thereof, comes from the way in which Enix operated its business at the time of the game's publication. As the game was published by Enix in all territories, it would have been up to them to publish the game on the American market too. However, around the time of Terranigma's release, Enix made the business decision to close its American branch of the company, and halt all future game releases in the region. Enix made this decision due to poor sales figures in America. Meanwhile, the game was given a full official release in Europe and Australia after Nintendo made the decision to localize and publish the game in those areas. Beyond this, the game was also given official translations for German, French, and Spanish languages as well. The translation team even featured Daniel Osen, a translator for Nintendo of America who worked on many AAA first-party titles. Osen was also one of the first voices heard on a Nintendo console, providing his voice for not only Star Fox, but for the introduction to Super Metroid as well.
The last Metroid is in captivity.
In many ways, people consider the game's lack of official US release to be a positive. American releases of SNES or SNES titles from the previous 2 games in the Soul Blazer trilogy were known to have instances of censorship, while Terranigma remained the same in all of its releases. While it's a shame that the US audience weren't able to play the game at the time of its release, it does mean that if the game is ever published through digital distribution in the future, it's possible that the game will feature the full European uncensored release.
Hello, and welcome to Region Locked. When many think of Squaresoft, they will immediately jump to the Final Fantasy series, a collection of RPGs with a loose common theme running through them. The company has historically been the masters of RPGs, particularly when it comes to the SNES's library of games, having published several of the best-selling and highest-rated titles on the platform for the genre. However, Square created several standalone games which never saw Western release, with one in particular combining multiple stories. That game is Live Alive. There's no confirmation as to how the game's name is pronounced, so for the sake of this video, we will be calling it Live Alive rather than Live Alive or Live Alive or whatever. Live Alive was published in 1994 for the SNES and features 7 different playable characters with their own aesthetic and stories. Typical of the RPG genre, the game focuses on having the player explore various locations through overworld navigation, talking with a variety of different NPCs, exploring dungeons, and gaining experience points in order to level up. Unlike most RPGs, however, most of the game's battles are plot-driven and fixed, with only one chapter having any form of random encounters. These battles play out similarly to turn-based tactical titles, from a top-down perspective on a 7x7 grid. While the player is able to perform basic attacks, several characters also have their own unique skills. Rather than using magic with a dedicated MP meter, as is standard for many RPGs, skills instead can take multiple turns to charge. During this period, the player cannot move and can be interrupted by enemies, cancelling the attack. Some attacks can alter tiles, causing a variety of effects when a character is standing on them, such as taking fire damage on a burning tile or receiving a status effect. When a character's life reaches 0, they are knocked out rather than being immediately killed. It's possible to revive the downed character by simply healing them. However, if the downed character is attacked, they will be removed from the fight altogether. After the fight is concluded, they are returned to the player with full life. The game's basic premise follows heroes throughout time. During each period of history, there has been a hero who has fought for justice. Each of the game's 7 different protagonists has their own dedicated chapter, which can be chosen in any desired order, with each one working as a sort of standalone game. Chapters take place across a wide span of time, ranging from prehistoric times to modern day and even the distant future. Though the gameplay remains largely the same, each chapter does feature some variation. The Caveman chapter, Contact, with Pogo. During the prehistoric era, a young woman named Belle has escaped from a tribe seeking to sacrifice her to their deity, Odo, a T-Rex. She escapes to the south, hiding amongst another tribe's dwelling. When she is discovered by Pogo, our hero, and his friend, he helps to hide her from his tribe. After being discovered, the 3 are exiled and must fend for themselves alone. In a time before speech, this portion of the game involves no dialogue, instead having characters communicate through visual expressions. The Kung Fu Master chapter, Inheritance, with Jin Shangquan. Set in ancient China, in his old age, a powerful Kung Fu master has decided he needs to pass on his wisdom. He proceeds to gather 3 potential young protégés. The player trains the students through 3 stages, 1 for endurance, 1 for agility, and 1 for strength. Granted 4 training sessions per stage, the player must decide how to split them amongst the 3 trainees. The Ninja chapter, Secret Orders, with Oboro. Set in feudal Japan, a young ninja of the Enma clan, Oboro, is sent to infiltrate the castle of Odio. Ode has assembled a team of powerful evildoers and plans to plunge Japan into chaos. Oboro must free one of Ode's prisoners, said to be the only one capable of stabilizing Japan before facing off against the villains. The player has the option of sneaking through the castle, avoiding the majority of the fights, or they can simply cut down any opponents that stand in their way. The player can activate a cloak of invisibility to avoid detection from the patrolling guards. However, they are unable to move when in cover. There are numerous possible paths to choose from, some more dangerous than others. The Cowboy chapter, Wandering, with the Sundown Kid. In the American Old West, a lone, quiet cowboy with lightning-fast gun skills travels the land. The Sundown Kid. After his home was raided by a gang of outlaws, the guilt drove him to place a bounty on his own head so that he may find a place to die. Stopping off in Success Town, he takes on the burden of protecting it and its villagers from a bandit gang named the Crazy Bunch. The player has to collect resources that can be used as traps for when the bandits arrive, with the player selecting which NPC sets up which trap. Several character names in this section possibly make reference to famous outlaws of the Old West, with the Sundown Kid being the Sundance Kid, and the young child Billy being a reference to Billy the Kid. The Wrestler chapter, The Strongest, with Masaru. Taking place in modern day, Masaru of Japan dreams of becoming the strongest person on Earth. He enters a global fighting tournament so that he can learn more about combat styles from around the world, defeating each opponent to learn their skills and earning the title of the strongest person in the world. Unlike the other chapters of the game, this chapter has no overworld exploration. Instead, Masaru must compete in a series of fights, including a character clearly referencing Hulk Hogan, and with dialogue screens like those seen in Street Fighter II. The Mech chapter, Flow, with Akira Tadakoro. Taking place in Japan in the near future, kidnappings are occurring thanks to a biker gang called the Crusaders. Their intentions are unknown, but an orphan with psychic powers, Akira, sets out to rescue a child from his orphanage who has been taken by the gang. Akira soon learns of a government conspiracy involving mechs. It's highly likely that this chapter has been inspired by the manga and influential anime series Akira, a story involving psychic powers and biker gangs in the near future. The Science Fiction chapter, Mechanical Heart, with Cube. In the distant future, a robot on a transport ship headed to Earth with a behemoth in the cargo hold gets wrapped up in a crisis situation. The ship featured in this chapter is called Cogito Ergo Sum, a Latin phrase meaning I think, therefore I am, a famous philosophical statement that represents self-identity and awareness. The ship's pilot, Kirk, is named after James T. Kirk from Star Trek, and Corporal Darth is likewise named after Darth Vader from Star Wars. This chapter features almost no combat besides the final boss. An optional minigame can be played, however, in which the player must defeat 9 waves of enemies while taking on the role of Captain Square. Some chapters have multiple endings, and the player is able to replay them in order to achieve the results they desire. These endings can be decided by something as simple as dying, and each ending has an impact on the game's finale. A recurring dark comedic joke appears in the form of a father and son duo with the surname Watanabe. They appear in each chapter, and in most cases, the father will die, leaving the son distraught and worse off, providing nothing to the plot and only lending itself to humor. We're about to spoil the end of the game, so if you'd like to avoid any spoilers, skip to the time shown on screen. After completing all 7 of the original chapters, it should become apparent that the boss of each chapter is a variation of the same demon, Odio. An 8th story is unlocked at this point, the medieval chapter, King of Demons, with Orsted. Orsted, a hero in the land of Lucretia, and his friend Strabo compete in a tournament to win Princess Alicia's hand in marriage. The night after Orsted's victory, Alicia is kidnapped by the Demon King, and thus he and his friend embark to rescue her. Meeting the heroes of old who previously defeated the Demon King, Hash and Uranus, they are convinced to fight him once again. The team battles and defeats the Demon King, but not without the loss of Hash, who passes from the plague. Unable to find Elysia, and after Strabo is seemingly crushed by falling rocks, Orsted and Uranus return home defeated. The night of their return, Orsted is tricked into killing the King of Lucretia by the Demon King, causing others to accuse him of being the Demon King himself. After escaping imprisonment, Orsted returns to the mountain to find Strabo alive and well. Out of jealousy, Strabo sold his soul so that he may become the next Demon King, and thus he was the one who tricked Orsted into the act of murder. After defeating Strabo and rescuing Princess Elysia, she professes her love for Strabo, blaming Orsted for Strabo's descent into madness. She then commits suicide. Unable to handle the events surrounding him, Orsted makes the decision to become the next Demon King himself, donning the name Odio. Seeking out revenge, he kills everybody in the land. The final chapter. For the game's final chapter, the player can decide which character to take control of. After the events in the previous chapter, Orsted summons the heroes of the game for a final showdown. The player must recruit the 6 other characters and defeat Orsted in his final demon form. After being defeated, Orsted returns to his original form and requests the player kill him. After refusing, Orsted attacks again, forcing each protagonist to defeat the incarnation of Odio from their respective chapter. After taking each one down, the heroes all explain their reasons for fighting. Moved by their words, Orsted returns them back to their time periods, warning them that anybody is capable of becoming a demon if they are filled with enough hatred. He passes away, and Lucretia is returned to normal. With the final chapter of the game, if the player chooses Orsted as the lead role, he will take on the form of each boss in their time periods, defeating the heroes in each one. Orsted is then left to a world empty of human life while the credits roll. Live Alive is directed by Takashi Tokita after he had just completed work as a lead designer on Final Fantasy IV. After the game's release, he would then go on to direct Chrono Trigger, Parasite Eve, and Chocobo Racing. Tokita stated that by splitting the game into several different chapters, it was easier to create 7 shorter stories at once with different teams, rather than a single story playing throughout a long game. Each chapter in the game has its own unique style, designed by different popular manga artists, including Ryoji Minagawa, Gosho Aoyama, and Kazuhiko Shimamoto. The game's soundtrack was solely composed by Yoko Shimomura, renowned for her work on Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy XV, and a variety of Mario RPGs. References were included in the Final Fantasy Legends mobile series for Live Alive's 20th anniversary. Orsted appeared as a boss, and everyone that participated in the quest received a phantom of pure Odio. The Nintendo DS game, Theatrhythm Final Fantasy Curtain Call, also has 2 downloadable songs from the game, Birds in the Sky, Fish in the River, and Megalomania. During Megalomania's stage, Orsted and Strabo can be seen fighting on the Demon King's mountain. This would be the only time that a Western market would be exposed to any content from Live Alive. Live Alive received a re-release in Japan through Nintendo's Virtual Console on both Wii U in 2015 and for the new Nintendo 3DS in 2016. Because the 7 artists that were used to create the game were working for Shogakukan Publishing at the time of the game's original release, Shogakukan holds partial rights over the game. This made an official re-release a challenge for Square, but it also helps to determine a factor for why the game never saw localization. No official reason was provided by Square as a company, but the variety of tweets from Takashi Tokita regarding the game's Virtual Console release explain how the game's rights are still handled, as well as how instrumental community interest was in the game's revival. However, it is also possible that the game didn't manage to gain notoriety due to being released mere months after Square's smash hit game, Final Fantasy VI, resulting in Square as a company having little interest in working through the legal process. In 2011, Spencer of Silicon Era asked Takashi Tokita if he would ever consider a remake of the title. Tokita responded, "Definitely. If the fans request it, I'd love to do that. In my experience, Live Alive's omnibus style of multiple chapters was a learning experience and an element I brought over to Final Fantasy IV, The After Years. That's why that game has multiple chapters as well." The game received a fan translation in 2001 from Gideon Z of Translation Group Aeon Genesis as a project that he had undertaken for a business class. The resulting patch was widely considered to be usable, allowing the game to be played through in a largely unpolished state. In 2008, a new translation was made after Gideon took on help regarding the technical portion of the patch so that he could instead concentrate on writing. Considered to be the definitive work of the translation group, the 2.0 deluxe release of the translation doesn't just fix a large number of bugs present in the original fan translation, but also introduces a unique font for each chapter, as well as some other cosmetic flair.
Did you know? The inspiration for Harvest Moon came from series creator Yasuhiro Wada moving to Tokyo from his home in the Japanese countryside. Wada explained, "When I was in the city, I started reminiscing about what was good about where I came from, what made the countryside so special. That's where some of the key concepts for Harvest Moon came from." While working as a game designer in Tokyo, Wada began to develop ideas for a new type of game. He envisioned an RPG that was non-combat oriented and where the focus would be instead on life in the countryside. This was a way to recreate his nostalgic memories of home. The look and feel of the game, including the way the player interacts with environments with tools, was inspired by The Legend of Zelda. At the time, Wada had also been playing a Famicom game called Derby Stallion, which was a combination of horse racing and business simulation game. This helped inspire the concept of raising and taking care of animals. It was decided this new game would center around working on a ranch, where the player could also maintain a garden and sell crops. The idea of the game's farm growing larger as the player sold more items was influenced by SimCity. After the full concept of Harvest Moon was realized, Wada began to wonder if a game where players perform tasks that are considered hard labor in the real world would be any fun at all. This concern helped to form the pace of the game. In a presentation at the 2012 Game Developers Conference, Wada explained, "When attention is running high at all times, you get tired pretty easily. And on the flip side, it can get boring if everything is presented in a calm and composed manner. If we were to carefully craft a cycle in which you work diligently with a nice payoff or reward, the player would feel good." The original working title of Harvest Moon was Jinsei Monogatari, which translates to Life Farm. Game planner Setsuko Miyakoshi did not like this title and instead suggested Bokujo Monogatari, or Farm Story, which became the final name of the Japanese version of Harvest Moon. The game was renamed Harvest Moon outside of Japan by Natsume president Hiro Maekawa. This name comes from a real-life term, the harvest moon, which describes the full moon closest to the date of the autumn equinox. That is, the day in the fall when the day and night are of almost equal lengths of time. It's called a harvest moon because farmers can continue to harvest crops late into the night by light of the full moon. The development studio of Harvest Moon, Pack-In Video, went through several financial troubles partway through Harvest Moon's development cycle. The staff were stretched too thin, working on too many projects at once. During this time, the president of the company went missing, and the teams at Pack-In Video were scattered. Due to delays in development, barely any budget for Harvest Moon remained, and at the time, only 30% of the game was completed. Harvest Moon planner Setsuko Miyakoshi and programmer Tomomi Yamatate met with Yasuhiro Wada to assess whether the project could be salvaged. Wada was heartbroken by what was discovered, and he was ready to scrap Harvest Moon indefinitely. But Miyakoshi and Yamatate insisted they finish the game. The team was reduced from a staff of 10 to a staff of 3. Yamatate was the programmer, Miyakoshi took care of the art, and Wada performed scripting and playtesting. They brought sleeping bags to the office and worked long days. With only 6 months to complete the game, the 3 developers managed to reach the deadline, although many of the ideas from the initial planning stages had to be removed due to time constraints. Harvest Moon became a moderate financial success and a sequel was greenlit. All of the ideas that were removed from the first game made it into the sequel, Harvest Moon 64. Yasuhiro Wada has stated that he considers Harvest Moon 64 to be the game closest to what he originally envisioned. Harvest Moon Back to Nature for the PlayStation started development as an enhanced remake of Harvest Moon 64. Yasuhiro Wada assigned the team that designed the Game Boy Harvest Moon games to convert the title, and he suggested some ideas for additional content. When he returned to check on the project, he was surprised to find how much had changed. The game looked completely different. It had a different town, and the characters' personalities were changed, as were some of their names. Wada stated that this wasn't what he had in mind, but it was too late to go back, so the game was positioned as a parallel world to Harvest Moon 64. The Harvest Moon games contain several hidden secrets and exploits, some more well known than others. In Harvest Moon for the SNES, when you use a miracle potion on a mature cow to impregnate it, immediately using a medicine potion on the cow will cause it to give birth after 3 days instead of the normal 30 days. In Harvest Moon 64, it's possible to win bets at the horse and dog shows without actually betting any money. When talking to the mayor's wife to place bets, enter as much money as you want on any contestant, then press B as if to cancel instead of confirming. And after the race, you'll be awarded even though you never completed the bet. Another exploit in Harvest Moon 64 allows you to win the affection of Karen in 1 day. If you show your dog to her 50 times, her heart will increase 1 level. If this is done indoors while time is frozen, her heart levels can be filled to 100%. In Harvest Moon, More Friends of Mineral Town, if the player watches TV when the clock is at 4:44, a dialogue box will pop up repeating the phrase 4th hour, 44th minute in Japanese. This was put in to freak out Japanese gamers as the number 4 is pronounced shi, which is also the word for death. In the previous male versions of the game, doing this results in a glitch that causes the game to open and close an empty dialogue box repeatedly until the game is reset. Harvest Moon DS has its own take on this Easter egg. If the player examines the back of the doghouse at 4:44, the Witch Princess will appear, starting a doghouse battle minigame where the players fight each one of the bachelors and then the Witch Princess herself. Harvest Moon DS is also notable for being the only entry in the series to allow same-sex marriage, though this is only in the girl version and is referred to as a best friend system. It was excluded from releases of the game outside of Japan. One of the characters in Harvest Moon, Hero of Leaf Valley for the PSP, had his skin color changed. A trader called Zan, who was originally named Gold Dodo, had his skin made lighter when the game was localized in the West. The game's localizer Natsume commented on the change, saying, "Normally we're happy to see ethnically diverse characters in Harvest Moon games. However, Zan had a lot of characteristics that are, in the West, sometimes associated with hurtful and outdated stereotypes of native African people. The skull on his head, the fact that he spoke in broken English, etc. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to completely change his character design and rewrite all of his dialogue, so changing his skin color seemed to be the best fix. Again, we're happy to see ethnically diverse characters in Harvest Moon games, but not when they're reinforcing negative stereotypes that a lot of our players will find hurtful and offensive."
The life simulation genre requires players to raise a character they don't directly control. In the 90s, the genre was popularized with digital pet toys like Tamagotchi and Digimon, but even before then, it had its place in the gaming world. Life simulations, where the player raises a specific character, were coined raising sims, and have been popular in Japan for some time. The long-running Princess Maker series is a good example of a raising sim, and requires the character to raise a daughter to become a princess. Enix took this raising sim concept and created a Super Famicom game, built around a story of peace called Wonder Project J. Wonder Project J, Machine Boy Pino, was published by Enix in 1994 for the Super Famicom. It was developed by Evo Search for Eden developers, who left Technos and formed a studio called Almanac. Graphically, the art style can be compared to the works of Studio Ghibli, or early Japanese anime. It pushes the Super Famicom to its limits, and features a huge array of animations and actions that can be performed by the mechanical boy. The game has you watch over this mechanical child, whose default name is Pino, accompanied by a fairy/interface robot named Tinker. In the game's world, robots known as Gaijin have lived amongst humans for the last 50 years. Contempt has been steadily increasing among the two groups, and the few human sympathizers of Gaijin are often arrested. Our young boy's creator, Geppetto Lamarck, is one of these human sympathizers. Dreaming of a perfect Gaijin that can live as a human, Lamarck created a young robot. He had only one task left, to fill all the boy's heart circuits. This would teach the boy what it is to be a human, and awaken the fabled J circuit. Before Geppetto finishes his task, however, the government intervenes and takes him away, leaving the boy to fend for himself. The player is tasked to help raise the boy as a human and fulfill the old inventor's dream. As the young Gaijin is almost indistinguishable from a real human, many of the people on the island mistake him for one of their own. Early on, we're also introduced to the Gaijin of the island, who face discrimination from the humans. The player uses Tinker to instruct the boy on how to use objects correctly, as well as helping him grow his abilities and understanding of the world. In many cases, he won't understand what's being instructed and will attempt to eat live chickens whole or worship objects for no good reason. To combat his naturally boisterous actions, the player can praise him for using items correctly. If he acts in a manner that the player doesn't like, they can scold him, teaching him not to do it again. By teaching with care and tough love, the player and Pino develop a shared bond. Encounters throughout the island challenge the boy's understanding of the world by testing if he's capable of solving basic problems and performing tasks for the other residents. These tasks encompass a number of skills and personality traits, including picking locks on chests and even fighting. The player must adjust their mentality when dealing with each situation, having the child's kindness stats be high when dealing with animals, but less so when entering competitions. While the game's pacing is quite slow due to continuously training the child, there are a few segments with more action. The title has dungeons that the player must help Pino navigate, instructing him to attack where needed or preventing him from walking into traps. The player can purchase equipment from an item shop in town to assist with training, such as weapons and books of increasing difficulty. Items can also be fed to the boy to restore his health, grant him with temporary buffs, or completely alter his abilities. The player's overall goal is to ease hostility between humans and Gaijin, forming personal connections between yourself, the child, and the co-inhabitants of Korlo Island. With multiple endings, Wonder Project J provides many options for how the player can work to solve this problem. We've decided to keep some of the game's key plot points out of this video, as we're sure many will want to seek this game out for themselves. Whilst Wonder Project J never saw a release in the West, it was covered in Super Play magazine in the UK. The game's story is often compared to Pinocchio and Peter Pan, with similarities between Tinker and Tinkerbell, the child and Pinocchio, and of course between Geppetto from the game and Pinocchio. However, the Super Play magazine refers to Dr. Geppetto as Dr. Gebet Lamarck. The Geppetto name comes from the fan translation team Whacked Hacks. The lack of localization outside of Japan possibly comes from Wonder Project J's themes, requiring the player to sometimes smack the boy to teach him wrong from right. Corporal punishment was falling out of fashion in the US at the time, partly due to research indicating it was more harmful to child development than previously thought. The game is also dialogue heavy and could be costly to translate. Any additional costs would reduce the game's chances at financial success. Aside from these possibilities, we couldn't find sources for why Wonder Project J never came to the West. However, as the game received a sequel that also remained a Japan exclusive, we can only assume the decision wasn't influenced by lack of sales or interest.
The Super Nintendo had a library of wonderfully odd games, as well as its share of releases that shaped the gaming world as a whole. Several titles showed everyone that games didn't need to be basic arcade titles anymore. They could instead be long adventures that include interesting stories and have in-depth worlds that are more than just a background. Today we'll be looking at a game released towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle, Gunpul: Gunman's Proof. Gunpul was published by ASCII in 1997 and developed by Lennar, a relatively unknown company. Their most notable release was Deadly Towers on the NES in 1986, which received great commercial success with mixed reviews at the time. Gunpul is a clear-cut clone of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, with a few minor changes. The change that stands out the most is the way the player attacks. Instead of close-range swordplay, the player fires a pistol at enemies. With the use of the shoulder buttons, the player can strafe, locking in a certain direction while shooting. They can also punch, but doing so isn't very effective. Bullets allow for quicker attacks at longer distances with no noticeable difference in damage to a punch. The game also has a screen that's almost identical to A Link to the Past's inventory screen. However, instead of items, it lists the player's available skills. Power-up items are found throughout the game, including different types of temporary guns and a carrot. We'll explain that later. Another contrast to A Link to the Past is that the game uses a lives system. If the player dies, they will be revived on the spot with their health fully recovered. If the player runs out of lives, they'll get a game over and respawn in the player's home village. The player can also find chests in dungeons. The treasures inside are converted into points once a dungeon is finished. Completing the dungeon quickly or with a lot of life remaining will award even more points. As the player is using guns and doesn't have any sort of shield, attacks can be actively dodged by using the crouch button. This lets players avoid gunfire by ducking underneath bullets, though the player can't fire while crouched. The player can also gain special skills, like a charge shot used by holding down the attack button. The game's story takes place in the year 1880. Two meteors crash into the Earth on a small island near the western coast of North America. However, nobody seems to care. It isn't until some time later, when monsters appear and attack villages, that people start to worry. After the monsters attack their victims, they drop crests inscribed with the word demi-seed, which comes to describe the monsters themselves. One day, the game's protagonist, a young farm boy who lives in the only town on the island, finds a crash-landed miniature UFO. Two mini-aliens emerge from the ship, known as Zero and Garrow. They inform the player that an intergalactic criminal named Demi has escaped justice and is hiding on the island, and that they are in fact space sheriffs. Zero then possesses the player's body, granting him the power to fight the monsters. Together, Zero and the player must destroy Demi, thereby restoring peace to the island. During the adventure, the player meets up with Mono, another alien who crash-landed while hunting Demi. Unfortunately, Mono possessed the body of a horse named Roboton and is unable to escape it. He joins the player in his quest and can be summoned by collecting a carrot, allowing the player to ride him and become temporarily invincible. Graphically, it's clear that the game's backgrounds are directly influenced by A Link to the Past, but with character sprites closer to the minimalistic style of Mother 3. The comparisons between Zelda and Gunpla are made even more obvious by the dungeon map screen. As you can see, the screen is almost exactly the same as Zelda's. Altogether, Gunpla takes a lot from A Link to the Past, but it at least has a unique approach with its theme and gun-based gameplay. Notable names attached to the project include Isami Nakagawa, who worked on the game's packaging artwork. Nakagawa became popular with his work on Poguri, a Japanese manga series. Also attached to the title was Akihito Tomisawa, a designer and scenario writer who previously worked at Game Freak. Several years after Gunpla's release, he mentioned his dissatisfaction with the final game, saying, "Inspired by my favorite Western dramas, I wanted to make a game based on Mr. Isami Nakagawa's character. However, there were several obstacles, such as communication with the company programming the game didn't go well, and it was commercialized without my consent. My ideas are reflected in a part of the basic idea, but the final release is completely different from what I had initially intended. I was deeply aware of the difficulty of making games in a freelance position. If given permission, it's a game I would remake." The game was likely never localized in the West because of its late publishing date, but there might be another, more sad reason, as it seems Gunpla was in fact Lanar's last developed game. It's possible it sold too poorly for the company to remain active in the gaming market. If the company was struggling financially, publishing the title internationally was not an option. From the sounds of the quote from Tomisawa, it's possible they were only just able to release the game commercially in Japan, as the game appears to have been rushed out without Tomisawa's consent. Luckily, the game received a fan translation from Aeon Genesis.
Anyone who's familiar with Nintendo's Mario knows that the plumber has a plethora of games under his belt. Since the franchise is well known and easy to sell, Nintendo uses Mario to experiment with different genres and any new ideas they might be cooking up. That's why when Super Nintendo was given a mouse peripheral in 1991, Mario was chosen to demonstrate the peripheral's capabilities in Mario Paint. Although many Westerners got to play Mario Paint, Nintendo created another mouse-based Mario game that never made it to the West, Mario & Wario. Before we go into why the game was never localized, let's take a look at the game itself. Mario & Wario follows the story of Mario and his friends exploring a magical forest. Their goal is to find a fairy which is said to bring happiness to those who meet it. Whilst in the woods trying to confirm the legend, Luigi gets lost from the group, and so they split up to try and find him. During the search, Wario drops a bucket from the sky which becomes stuck on Mario's head. Wanda, the magical fairy that Mario and his friends are searching for, decides to intervene and help them out. Unable to remove the bucket due to being too weak, Wanda takes it upon herself to help guide Mario and his friends through a series of puzzles to help reunite them with the lost Lost Luigi. The gameplay revolves around using a mouse to control Wanda. Clicking on objects has Wanda interact with them, allowing the player to create safe passage for the characters. The main aim is to have them meet up with Luigi at the end of each stage, who has the strength to remove the bucket. Because of several key elements, the gameplay is often compared to the Mario vs Donkey Kong series. Characters walk forward on their own volition, so making sure they don't walk into danger is important. Each character has their own set speed, with Mario being faster than Peach and Yoshi being faster than Mario. The game includes a bonus stage at the end of each world where the player must use Wanda to hit Wario with a hammer. Each time Wario is hit, the player earns a coin. As you can see, there isn't a whole lot to this game that would make it particularly complicated to play, but levels do get progressively more difficult as time goes on. The game gradually introduces new blocks, includes additional enemies, and makes levels more complex, requiring the player to multitask efficiently. Mario & Wario was designed by Pokemon creator Satoshi Tajiri and was developed by the team at Game Freak. This makes Mario & Wario the second title Game Freak ever created with Nintendo after Yoshi on the NES. Their next time developing for Nintendo would be for the renowned Pokemon games. In fact, Mario & Wario shares the same composer as Pokemon, Junichi Masuda. Many people also believe that the World 7 music of Mario & Wario sounds similar to the Route 24 and 25 track heard in the first generation of Pokemon games. Mario & Wario's imprint on the history of the Mario series is very small, and is very rarely mentioned in the West, if at all. The only references we could find in Western releases were in Super Smash Bros. Melee, Kirby Superstar, and Pokemon. In Melee, the description for the bucket trophy makes mention of the game and its goal. In Kirby, the bucket that falls on Mario's head is a collectible treasure, and in Pokemon Red and Blue, when examined, the Super Nintendo in the Copycat's house in Saffron City states the game on the screen shows Mario with a bucket on his head. This reference was even carried forward to the game's remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green. Bringing Mario and Wario to the West would have been a quick and easy process, as the game's text is already written entirely in English, so why was it never localized? The answer to why Mario and Wario never made it to the West may lie in the game's sales figures. The title sold relatively poorly in Japan. This was likely related to the underwhelming sales of Mario Paint, which also used the Super Nintendo mouse peripheral. Mario and Wario sold roughly 500,000 copies in Japan, over 200,000 less than Mario Paint in the region. To give some perspective, Super Mario World, which came out 3 years prior, sold 3.5 million units in Japan alone. Since the game required the SNES mouse to function, the game would also need to be sold at a higher price if it were bundled with the peripheral. In Japan, Mario & Wario was sold bundled with the mouse for 9,500 yen, which in 1993 was about $100 US. Since most SNES games were $50 at the time, this would have been a hard sell in the US market. Evidence shows that the game almost did receive a release outside of Japan, however. A preview for the game can be found in the September 1993 edition of Nintendo Power, which compared the game to Lemmings. Kellogg's cereal also ran a competition that showed the box art of Mario & Wario among its prizes, though within the entry form, no publishing date had been set, and the game simply had an estimated release of 1994.
Hello and welcome to Region Locked. Games from Japan will often reference magical weapons, generally divine in nature, used to conquer evil while bringing justice to a world in distress. These weapons range from spears sent to the earth from the heavens, to swords obtained with holy magic. A bizarre game for the Super Nintendo opted to move away from these classic blades, however, and utilize something more multi-purpose. That game is Holy Umbrella. Holy Umbrella was released in 1995. The game was developed by Earthly Soft, an offshoot of Tecmo, and published by Naxat Soft. Holy Umbrella features a combination of two different perspectives, top-down overworlds and side-on battles. Whilst in a town, the player walks around under an overhead view. While in this perspective, they can talk with residents, explore villages, purchase restorative items, and loot people's possessions. This top-down angle changes during combat segments, and the game turns into a side-scrolling style instead. Like any action platformer, it's possible to jump or attack. The umbrella can be used for basic attacks, but can also be used to swing from hooks. It's also possible to use the shoulder buttons to switch between characters, and play with an entirely different set of skills. While the protagonist wields an umbrella, the small bird Bonto is capable of fitting into smaller spaces and can double jump at the expense of their attacking capabilities. And the character Saki is able to wall jump and perform sliding kicks. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses, and switching between them during levels is pivotal. New skills are unlocked as the player progresses, such as the ability to run and cover larger gaps with jumps, as well as being able to use the umbrella to hover. New umbrellas are also unlocked, each featuring their own special skills. This includes the Ice Umbrella, which can turn enemies into ice blocks, and the Fire Umbrella, which can create a homing projectile which can be picked up with the umbrella and thrown at any time. The game's story is perhaps the title's biggest selling point. One day, a young Japanese boy is walking home from school when suddenly it begins to rain exceptionally hard. The boy discovers what he presumes to be an ordinary umbrella on the ground, which he could use to shield himself from the storm. But, to his surprise, upon grabbing the umbrella, the boy is sent into another world. When he arrives in this world, the boy is attacked by Dondera Tank, an antagonist who appears throughout the boy's journey. The boy is saved by a man named Kilorn, who informs him he is in the magical world of Margins, specifically the country of Thurgical. The princess of this land holds magic power which could be used to send the boy home. However, after a seal which had been kept safe for centuries was broken by the evil Emperor Dondera, she has fallen into a weakened state. After the seal was broken, Emperor Dondera obtained magical powers which he used to summon hordes of monsters to attack town after town. In order to return home, the boy must seal the Dondera army and restore the princess's power. Kilorn then tells the boy the legend of the Holy Umbrella, the weapon that he now wields. Long ago, gods and goblins lived in the world. The umbrella was created from the life force of a god and granted to a human in order to destroy a powerful goblin. Once the goblin was defeated, the umbrella was divided into 7 holy umbrellas, which were each sealed away for their protection. To learn more, the boy must travel the world defeating the Dondera army, accompanied by Bonto, a pet bird raised by Kilorn, and Saki, a young girl looking to seek out adventure. Games which feature strong Japanese themes struggle to find their way overseas. This isn't simply because the publishers feel that the game's themes are too outlandish, it's also because popular culture differs across different regions. Humor which is built around the understanding of this culture doesn't always translate well, and when video games were less established, this was a major concern for the publishers. Holy Umbrella's references to anime and Japanese pop culture, as well as the game's outlandish plot, didn't help make the game easy to localize. With extensive amounts of text for what is essentially a standard action platformer, the translation process would have needed more time and resources than normal, and may not have been worth the effort. Naxat Soft also had no games published internationally at the time of Holy Umbrella's release, with the only exception being Serpent on the Game Boy, and even then they didn't publish this game by themselves. This meant that the company were probably never considering the idea in the first place, and it was purely created for the Japanese market. You can still play Holy Umbrella in English, however. This is thanks once again to Aeon Genesis, who made the game a full English fan translation patch back in 2009.
We see a lot of police in games, and we see a lot of doctors in games, but we don't really see a huge amount of firefighters. There are but a few games that cover the role, with one of the first fully fledged commercial titles being exclusive to the Japanese and European regions. That game is The Firemen on the SNES. The Firemen was created by Human Entertainment and released in 1994. The game's plot takes place in the distant future, the year 2010. Technology has advanced only slightly, and a basic firefighting squad is still the standard way of handling fires. On the evening of a Christmas party being held for staff at a chemical development company known as Microtech, and not in the Nakatomi Plaza, a fire has broken out and is spreading rapidly across the building. With no other option for a safe mission to be carried out, it's up to emergency services to extinguish the fire at any cost and rescue stranded civilians lost throughout the complex. Due to the abundant supply of chemicals, the fire has spread at an alarming rate across the high-rise. The city's D-Sector Fire Brigade has dispatched a unit to the scene, formed of Pete, Daniel, Max, Walter, and Winona. After arriving on the scene, the team learns of a large supply of the highly combustible chemical MDL located within the building's basement. The unit splits up in order to obtain the MDL as quickly as possible, in hopes of delivering it to the roof in order to blow up a water tank, which should help to extinguish the blaze. A plan that will definitely work. The player takes control of the highly commended Pete Gray, the captain of the 5-member unit, and his second in command, Daniel McLean. Clean. That was not even on purpose. Daniel is able to take care of himself, making use of his fire axe and lighter load to operate control panels and open doors throughout the duo's ascent. Pete has a water hose at his disposal with an infinitely abundant supply of water. He's able to use this high-powered hose to fire water in any direction around him with great distance, while also using it to extinguish flames that might be rising from below him. Pete is also able to strafe with his hose to efficiently extinguish flames. The team can use grenades which release water within a moderate blast radius, though these are limited and must be found throughout the building. By finding civilians, Pete is able to restore a portion of his health, and at the end of each stage, the two must take out an extremely dangerous flame in the form of a boss battle. With the nature of the work carried out in the building, hazards come in many shapes and sizes. Ceilings which fall in, robots which have been fully engulfed in flames, or flames with aggressive habits and patterns will also become more common as the duo progress. The game is made up of stages with a time limit, and while the player has unlimited ammunition, lives are limited to only 3 continues. Daniel is fully controlled by the game's AI, and being invincible is a much needed partner as progress is made. However, as the team progresses further, backdraft becomes more and more common, and thus opening doors could result in huge explosions, which are really annoying. While the game's setting is in New York, featuring a firefighting team of Americans, the game never saw release in America. It did receive a full translation and was ultimately localized for Europe, featuring English, French, and German languages. It's easy to assume that the game's region-locked status comes from the theme of firefighters being considered uninteresting to an American audience. However, Ignition Factor from Jaleco did receive a release in the States. While an alleged prototype for a US version of the game set to be released surfaced online, one of the owners of a prototype cart, Evan G., performed research only to come to the conclusion that the prototypes are likely only early PAL localizations which had not been script-checked yet. Coverage of the title within America can be found in Electronic Gaming monthly issues of August and September in 1994, where it was first covered in a small segment on Japanese games, and then later receiving a double-page spread, still not stating any plans for localization. The series proved popular enough within the Japanese market that a sequel was created for the PlayStation, this time being published only within Japan. The game featured a 2-player option and added voice acting, but it's considered to be a step backwards for the game's action. Human Entertainment closed its doors at the end of the 90s, taking a number of franchises with it. The company's most notable series, Fire Pro Wrestling, continued on beyond the development house's demise with Spike, and the only other title which had much of an impact in the West was Clock Tower. But with the progression of the survival horror genre at the time, not many people took much notice of its disappearance. The Fireman is a set of 2 games which remained within obscurity and fizzled out with Human Entertainment.
We all know Disney and its many franchises, unless you've been living under a rock. Almost no other animation studio was as successful as Disney when it came to the 16-bit era of video games. Disney made lots of games that people still consider to be the best of the generation, and that's why finding that Disney had another platformer that was only released in Japan, it's curious to see why it was never brought over to America. Today, we'll be looking at Mickey no Tokyo Disneyland Daibalken, which translates to Mickey's Great Adventure in Tokyo Disneyland. Mickey no Tokyo was released in 1994 by Tomy for the SNES, and stars the Disney icon Mickey Mouse. It's a typical action platformer, as was standard for Disney in the 90s, but with an interesting twist. To navigate the stage, Mickey has a gas tank on his back, which he uses to inflate balloons. This allows him to float upwards or release gas all at once to boost in any direction. Mickey also carries a water tank, allowing him to throw water balloons or place them on the ground as a platform to walk on. They can also be used to perform a jump boost. Mickey can only attack above him by releasing his deadly gas balloons. The size of the balloon can be changed by holding in the button longer, just like in real life. changing how far the attack will go or how high Mickey can fly. The title makes use of water balloons in unique puzzle areas, such as creating a string of them that must be placed to create a platform to help pass over large holes. This basically sums up the game's mechanics, and sadly, there isn't much else to it. The balloon attack that Mickey uses was also featured in an earlier game, Mickey Mouse 3 Balloon Dreams. Balloon Dreams was kind of exclusive to Japan as a Mickey Mouse game, but in the US exclusive release, he was replaced with a clown. This title was published as Kid Clown in Nightmare World. The game's plot contains many Disney characters, as you would expect. Mickey Mouse has traveled to Tokyo Disneyland with his friends in order to prepare for the park's latest opening. But upon his arrival, Minnie reveals that his friends have all been kidnapped by Pete, who's taken over the park. Mickey must pass through the various iconic attractions of the park to take down Pete whilst also rescuing his friends. Each stage is set in a different part of the park with its own themed enemies. A variety of enemies that range from ghosts to robots, bees, and mimic chests. At the end of each stage, the player must battle Pete in a variety of forms, reminiscent of Dr. Robotnik and his robots. There are a total of 6 friends that need to be rescued throughout the game: Daisy, Donald, Scrooge, Goofy, Pluto, and everyone's favourite, Elvira. While this means the game isn't particularly long, it still can be challenging. There are 3 difficulty settings, and even on the easiest mode, it still requires a decent amount of skill to progress. The changes between these settings include the amount of obstacles that will be put in your way, as well as how much life Mickey has. Easy mode gives you 8 hit points, normal mode gives you 5, and hard mode only gives you 3. The game was likely made to boost interest in Disney's new Tokyo theme park. The lack of release outside of the region comes due to licensing issues, with Capcom having held the rights to Disney games released in the US market on Nintendo platforms. Mickey Mouse 3, or Kid Clown in the US, had a prototype English translation created by Kemco at the time of its release. The reason for its cancellation was because of this licensing problem, and as a result, it would only make sense that Mickey no Tokyo would suffer the same fate. Sadly, while Mickey Mouse 3 sort of did get a release with Kemco replacing Mickey Mouse with an original character, the same cannot be said for Tomi's SNES title.
Did you know? The protagonist of Wolfenstein 3D, William B.J. Blazkowicz, is the grandfather of another id Software character, Commander Keen. Keen goes by the pseudonym Billy Blaze, but his full name is actually William Blazkowicz II. Wolfenstein has direct connections to id's Doom series as well. In the mobile spin-off Doom RPG, players take the role of a Marine named B.J. Blazkowicz III, and Doom 2 RPG features a Marine named Stan Blazkowicz. In another mobile spin-off, Wolfenstein RPG, the final boss is a demon known as the Harbinger of Doom. During the battle, the monster loses its left arm and right leg, the same limbs replaced with prosthetics on the cyber demons in Doom. When id Software began development on what became Wolfenstein 3D, they didn't start with a World War II theme. The first concept was a generic monster shooter called It's Green and Pissed, inspired by a line from 1982's The Thing. Other names they considered for the project included Die Mutants Die, 3 Demons, and Texture Map Terrence in the Green Shit. Lead designer and programmer John Romero was a fan of the original 8-bit Castle Wolfenstein from 1981, and he convinced the team to remake it with their brand of 3D technology. id Software actually began remaking the game before they even had permission from the original license holder. They didn't know if they'd be allowed to use the Wolfenstein trademark, so as a backup plan they came up with a list of alternate names on the same theme. This list included names like Deep in Germany, Castle Hasselhoff, Adolf's Bane, Dolchsteufel, Devil Dagger, and Geruchschlecht, Bad Smell. Another name they considered was Castle Hollahammer, which later became the name of the second castle featured in Episode 2 of Wolfenstein 3D. While working under a tentative title, id Software discovered the publisher for Castle Wolfenstein went bankrupt in the mid-1980s and let the trademark lapse. They purchased the trademark at a low cost and officially rebooted the series. In the early stages of development, Wolfenstein 3D had more elements of stealth, similar to the original Castle Wolfenstein. Players could drag corpses, swap uniforms, and pick locks. These features were removed, however, as they slowed the pace of the game. Lead programmer John Carmack took the raycasting engine he created for Hover Tank and Catacomb 3D and improved its speed for Wolf 3D. One of Wolfenstein's most iconic features, the secret push walls, almost didn't make it into the game. Tom Hall wanted the secret walls to move backwards, but John Carmack didn't like the idea. Carmack thought the implementation of the sliding walls was an ugly hack and that their inclusion would sacrifice speed, simplicity, and efficiency in the code. The disagreement continued for months, with John Romero siding with Tom and Carmack becoming annoyed by the constant requests. Finally, when the game was nearing completion, Romero and Hall decided to ask Carmack one last time to add in push walls. When they got there, Carmack told the two men that push walls were already in the game. Carmack simply added the secrets without telling them. The graphic content of Wolfenstein 3D became a contentious issue with the game's retail publisher, FormGen. id Software's business partner Scott Miller was told by an executive of FormGen, "We don't think they should be showing blood and stirring up the World War II stuff. We're really worried about this. It's too realistic. We're going to make a lot of people upset. There's never been a game like this." Rebelliously, Scott Miller then called id Software and suggested that they make the game even more gratuitous. They added more blood, skeletons hanging from the ceilings, and a death cam that repeated every frame of graphic detail at the end of a boss fight. FormGen published the game with no alterations. The release of Wolfenstein 3D caused minor controversies all over the world, but in Germany it was outright banned by the government. A German federal law forbids the use of Nazi imagery in popular media. This includes the use of swastikas, Hitler's name and likeness, and the game's opening theme, which is a MIDI version of the Nazi Party anthem. Even though it couldn't be sold in German stores, online distribution of the game continued through BBS boards. German gamers even created a secret codename for the game, Hundefelsen 4C. Wolfenstein roughly translates to English as Wolf Stone, and the name Hundefelsen contains the German words for hound and rock. The game is notorious among German speakers for bad grammar and thick American accent. The iconic death cry, "Mein Leben!" awkwardly translates to "My life!" and the dying officer's voice clip, "Nein, so was!" means, "Well, I never." Some members of id Software were culturally unaware to the point that sound designer Bobby Prince had to explain that not all Germans were Nazis. He was concerned after reading the first draft of the manual, which listed Nazi soldiers as simply Germans. A surprising number of the many Wolfenstein 3D ports were actually developed in-house by id Software. The most infamous example is the heavily censored Super Nintendo port. Developers at Interplay were supposed to create the SNES version, but they were not able to complete the project in time. So Carmack decided to program the port himself and earned $100,000 from Nintendo. Decades later, an early build of the SNES version leaked online and showcased a few differences, including less censorship. The maps of the older version are closer to the PC release, and Hitler is renamed Hister rather than Statmeister. All of the censored imagery was also developed by id at the request of Nintendo. Id had detailed knowledge of Nintendo's strict policies against certain types of imagery, including religious imagery. Despite this, they agreed to license their Super Nintendo Wolfenstein engine to the Christian game developer Wisdom Tree for a bootleg religious-themed game. The result was Super Noah's Ark 3D, one of the few unlicensed SNES cartridges. id Software's chief executive Jay Wilbur thought Noah's Ark 3D was hilarious. The Atari Jaguar version of Wolfenstein was another port developed by id Software. The sprites and textures were upgraded as part of a test to see if the Jaguar had enough power to run Doom. In 2009, John Carmack personally ported Wolfenstein 3D to iOS devices in his spare time. The most recent Carmack-developed port of Wolfenstein is a browser-based HTML5 version. It was created to commemorate the release of Wolfenstein: The New Order in 2014. One of the most impressive ports of Wolfenstein is an unofficial Game Boy Color version. The homebrew software was developed by a fan named Anders Granlund, who fit a custom co-processing chip in the cartridge to render 3D environments on the 8-bit system. In 1993, Wolfenstein 3D was part of an early attempt at virtual reality gaming. A company called Alternate World Technologies created a VR arcade unit using the game as a base. The cabinet contained a version of the game called Wolfenstein VR, as well as two other games that use use the Wolf 3D engine. During a Q&A at QuakeCon 2012, Carmack recalled being appalled by the video quality of Wolfenstein VR. When he took a look at the video connection for the headset, he realized it was connected to a camcorder that was recording the screen of a monitor. The machine had a limited release and is considered very rare by the International Arcade Museum.